Good evening, and welcome to the Science Dreams channel. If you're here to unwind, to let your thoughts slow down, like drifting clouds, you're in the right place. Tonight we're going to lie quietly beside a very old question. Why does anything change at all? And why does it keep changing? From the shape of a leaf to the swirl of a galaxy, nothing in the universe is truly still. Even when everything around you feels calm, something deep inside the world is always moving, reshaping, adjusting in ways that might be too slow for human eyes, but not too slow for time itself. Before we begin, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Somewhere in a city, washed in neon. A small room lit only by a bedside lamp. A train, an airplane, a quiet corner of the world. It always amazes me to imagine minds scattered across the planet, connected by curiosity and a shared wish to understand a little more before sleep. If you find this journey soothing or thought-provoking, please consider giving it a like and subscribing. If you're already part of this quiet little community, thank you. You help keep these stories alive. Just don't forget to tap the notification bell so you won't miss the next time we drift into something new together. I do hope this episode isn't so interesting that it keeps you awake. But if it does, at least you might drift off a little wiser than before. So let's allow the day to fade and the night to settle. Imagine the room around you dimming, the noise of the day softening until it becomes a kind of distant echo. Outside, streets, trees, and rooftops look still, almost frozen. Yet even in this stillness, countless tiny processes are unfolding. In your body, cells are dividing, proteins are being built, old molecules are being broken down and recycled. Under the soil, roots are growing hair-fine tips, fungi are sending out filaments in all directions, chemical signals are passing between organisms that will never see each other's faces. On the surface of distant oceans, currents are shifting by small degrees. It might seem like nothing is happening, but the present moment is a thin slice of an ongoing transformation that began long before we arrived and will continue long after we're gone. If everything looks quiet right now, what would it look like if you could speed time up 1,000,000 times or 1,000,000,000? If we took that quiet tree outside your window and watched it on, fast forward, it wouldn't look calm at all. Branches would twist and reach, trunks would thicken and crack, leaves would appear dark and fall and be reborn. Insects would rise and vanish like sparks. The tree line might even advance or retreat as the climate shifts. On a longer time scale, entire forests may move across continents, coastlines might redraw themselves, and mountains could slowly erode into the sea. The world you know is more like a single frame in a long film than a finished picture. Evolution, in the broadest sense, is this story of change over time. The way systems from rocks to rivers to living beings do not stay fixed, but respond to pressure, chance, and history. In physics, stars evolve. They burn their fuel, expand, collapse, and sometimes explode, creating new elements that will later become parts of planets and eventually of living bodies. In geology, landscapes evolve. Tectonic plates drift, collide, and separate building mountain chains, opening oceans, closing others. And in biology, life evolves. Populations of organisms gradually shift as generations pass, shaped by differences in survival and reproduction. Each layer of the universe, from the elemental to the living, carries its own version of change with memory, where what happened before influences what is possible next. One of the oddest things about being human is that we live in a time window that hides most of this transformation. Human lifetimes are short compared to the slow turning of planetary cycles or the deep adjustments of ecosystems. A forest might take centuries to truly change character. An animal lineage might need millions of years. Continents move only a handful of centimeters in an entire year. To our senses, that feels almost identical to not moving at all. We're wired to notice things that shift quickly. A flashing light, a sudden sound, a movement in the corner of our eye, because those changes might signal danger or opportunity. But the world is also full of changes that are so slow and broad, they almost look like stability. Could it be that what we call stable is just changing at a pace we don't easily see? If you imagine the history of Earth compressed into a single day, humans would appear only in the last few seconds before midnight. For most of that imaginary day, the planet is ruled by bacteria, algae, and simple multicellular life. Continents, drift climates, swing from ice ages to warm periods. Oceans rise and fall. Whole branches of life appear, diversify, then vanish, leaving only fossils as traces. Under the right conditions, a small genetic variation in a primitive fish may, over many millions of years, contribute to the structure of your own hand. A tiny shift in the arrangement of early land plants could eventually influence how entire ecosystems capture sunlight and cycle carbon. The patterns we see around us now are snapshots in a long chain of cause and effect that started long before there were cities, languages, or memories. In everyday language, evolution often makes people think only of animals changing shape, or of the ancestor of humans slowly standing upright. But in a broader scientific sense, evolution is about how systems store information, change that information, and then test it against reality. In living beings, that information is written in molecules like DNA. In stars, it's encoded in mass, temperature, and composition. In societies, it might be stored in language, culture, and technology. Each system in its own way explores possibilities. Most possibilities go nowhere. A few persist, and over time the survivors define what exists. It may feel unsettling to realize that the world is not fixed, that arrangements we take for granted, species, climates, landscapes, might be temporary. Yet there's also something deeply calming in seeing that change itself is lawful, not random chaos. The processes that allow birds to adapt to new environments or bacteria to withstand antibiotics do not rely on magic. They rely on variation, inheritance, and the way the environment favors some outcomes over others. The details may be complex, but the underlying logic stays surprisingly simple. That means the same basic principles might help explain why certain ideas spread through a culture, or why some technologies become dominant while others disappear. We live inside a network of evolving patterns that may be more connected than they first appear. Lying here listening, you might start to notice that even your own thoughts behave a little like an evolving population. A memory appears, shifts slightly. Each time you revisit it, gains new associations, loses others. Beliefs that helped you in one stage of life may feel too tight in another. Habits that once protected you may, under new conditions, quietly hold you back. In a sense, your inner world is also adapting, testing behaviors and interpretations, keeping some and letting others fade. It's not a perfect analogy, but it hints at something important. Evolution is not just a distant external process in fossils and galaxies. It is also mirrored in softer form within our daily adjustments to a changing world. Scientists suspect that certain patterns are almost inevitable given enough time and the right constraints. If there is a stable source of energy, a way to store information, and a medium where structures can form and break apart, complexity may gradually increase. It might not follow a straight line, and it definitely doesn't follow a scripted plan. But under the right conditions, simple rules can build surprisingly intricate outcomes. This is true for crystal growth in a cooling magma, for branching rivers on a landscape, and for nervous systems learning to sense and respond to their surroundings. The details differ. The underlying logic of change constrained by rules keeps echoing. So tonight, as we begin this series, we won't rush into every mechanism or put labels on every step. Instead, we rest with the core idea. The universe is not a static painting. It is an ongoing process. Matter reorganizes, energy flows, information accumulates and transforms. Life, as one expression of that, carries a special kind of memory in its genes, and a special kind of flexibility in its behavior, from bacteria to blue whales. Every organism you've ever heard of is part of a continuous experiment that has been running on this planet for almost 4 billion years. Does that make our existence feel smaller, or does it make it feel more connected, knowing that the atoms in your body were once inside exploding stars and ancient oceans, and that your distant cellular ancestors might have floated in warm, shallow seas eons ago? Over the next chapters, we'll walk more carefully through how living systems evolve, how new variations arise, how they're passed on, how environments gently but firmly filter what works from what doesn't, and how vast stretches of time amplify small edges into major differences. We'll explore why some species become highly specialized while others remain flexible. Generalists, why cooperation emerges in a world that often seems built on competition, and why nature's designs are powerful but rarely perfect. Along the way, we might find that these ideas don't just describe beetles, birds, and bacteria. They may also offer a quiet framework for thinking about our own choices, our technologies, and even the futures we hope to build. For now, though, it's enough to recognize that the stillness around you is an illusion created by a short life and a fast mind. Underneath, processes are always at work. Cells continue their intricate chemistry. Populations are shifting in tiny increments. Ideas are spreading, mutating, and either fading or taking root. The night above your roof is not empty. It is full of distant suns in different stages of their own evolution. Somewhere, on another world, change might be unfolding, along lines we can't yet imagine. Here, in this quiet moment, we simply acknowledge that we belong to a universe where nothing truly stands still. As your thoughts slow and your breathing deepens, you might let a single question rest quietly in the background. If change is the rule, rather than the exception, what hidden processes are already reshaping the world you'll wake up to tomorrow? And how did they begin in the first place? If you could shrink yourself down, not just to the size of a dust mote, but millions of times smaller than that, you might find yourself drifting inside a cell, surrounded by a quiet that feels almost absolute. No wind, no sound, no obvious motion. And yet in that apparent stillness, something is always happening. Long molecules coil and uncoil, enzymes glide along invisible rails, and in the center of it all, a thin, twisting thread carries the instructions for an entire organism. That thread is DNA, and it does something extraordinary. It copies itself, almost perfectly. Almost. DNA is a long sequence, built from 4 chemical letters. They don't spell words the way human languages do, but they form codes for proteins, those tiny machines and structures that make bodies possible. Every time a cell divides, it has to duplicate this library. Special proteins slide along the DNA strand, like careful scribes, matching letter to letter, strand to strand. Most of the time, the copy is so faithful that nothing changes. But once in a while, a letter is swapped, an extra segment is added, or a piece goes missing. In everyday life, we might call that a typo. In biology, it is a mutation. Mutations can sound dramatic, but most of them are quietly unremarkable. Many occur in stretches of DNA that do not change how a protein works. Others might alter a protein slightly, but not enough to matter in the world outside the cell. A few changes, however, can affect how a protein folds, how active an enzyme is, or how sensitive a receptor becomes. Under the right conditions, such a change might subtly influence how a plant handles drought, how an animal sees in dim light, or how a bacterium tolerates a new chemical in its environment. The scale is microscopic, but the consequences may echo for generations. DNA is not just copied once and then filed away. In organisms that reproduce sexually, it is also shuffled. When egg and sperm are formed, each one carries a mixed set of chromosomes, pieces of DNA inherited from previous generations. During this process, sections of DNA may cross over and swap places. Imagine two copies of a long manuscript laid side by side with a hand that occasionally cuts and trades entire paragraphs between them. The result is a new combination of old sentences. This is recombination. It does not invent new letters, but it rearranges which ones appear together, creating fresh combinations of traits. That is why siblings can look so different, even when they share the same parents. One child might inherit a particular blend of facial features, another, a different mixture of height, voice, and metabolism. At the level of DNA, they are drawing from the same deck, but the shuffle is unique every time. Over many generations, this continual reshuffling keeps populations flexible. Under changing environments, some combinations might work slightly better than others, not because they were designed, but because variation was already there, waiting to be tested. Sometimes, the genome does something even bolder than swapping segments. Entire genes may be accidentally duplicated. At first glance, that seems redundant, like printing the same page twice in a book. Yet duplication can be one of evolution's most powerful tools. One copy of the gene continues to perform its original function, keeping the organism alive and stable. The extra copy, no longer under such strict constraint, is free to accumulate mutations without immediately causing disaster. Over long stretches of time, that extra copy might drift into a new role. A protein that once bound a simple molecule might gain the ability to bind a different one. A structural protein might become part of a new tissue. Under the right conditions, whole families of genes can arise in this way, each branch taking on a slightly different task. Many complex systems in animals and plants seem to trace back to ancient duplication events. Groups of genes involved in vision, smell, or immune defense often form clusters with similar sequences, like variations on a theme. It is as if life took a useful page, photocopied it several times, and then scribbled in the margins of each copy until new meanings emerged. The process is not guided by intent, but it may feel almost creative when viewed from afar. Variation does not only come from changes in the DNA sequence itself. There is another layer of control, more subtle and flexible, called epigenetic regulation. Chemical marks can be added to DNA or to the proteins around which DNA is wrapped. These marks influence how easily certain genes are read. Under stress during development or in response to diet and environment, some genes may be turned up or turned down without altering the underlying letters. In a way, this is like placing bookmarks, highlights, or sticky notes throughout the genetic library. The text does not change, but the way it is read does. In some cases, epigenetic patterns may persist for a generation or two. A plant exposed to a harsh season might adjust which genes are active, and some of those adjustments might be partially passed on in its seeds. The same may happen in animals that experience famine or extreme stress at crucial stages of development. Epigenetics does not replace classical genetics. It sits beside it, offering a short-term tunable layer of variation. Over longer spans, natural selection still acts mainly on the underlying DNA sequence, but epigenetic flexibility may help lineages endure sudden shocks long enough for more permanent changes to arise. All of these mechanisms, mutation, recombination, gene duplication, epigenetic modulation, feed the same reservoir variation within populations. When a species is large and widespread, the number of individuals is high, and so is the number of possible changes. Each cell division, each reproductive event, is another chance for small alterations to slip into the code. Most of them will have no noticeable effect. Some will be harmful and quietly removed as those organisms fail to thrive. A tiny fraction might confer advantages that only become apparent when the world shifts, when a new predator arrives, a climate cools, or a novel disease spreads. In very small populations, chance may dominate. If only a few individuals survive a storm, a migration, or a human-caused disturbance, the particular set of variants they carry will become the foundation for all future descendants. Traits that were once rare may suddenly become common, not because they were better, but because they happened to be present in the survivors. This is genetic drift. It reminds us that variation is not only shaped by logic and function, but also by randomness and history. You might wonder, if so many changes are random, why does the living world look so ordered? Why do eyes, wings, leaves, and nervous systems emerge again and again in coherent functional forms? The quiet answer is that variation is only the first step. It produces a cloud of possibilities, alternate pigments, new receptors, slightly different enzymes, altered growth patterns. The environment then acts as a filter, favoring those variants that can coexist with gravity, chemistry, temperature, and the demands of survival. Most possible combinations never take hold. The ones that remain may give the impression of careful design, but they are more like sentences that still make sense after countless drafts have been discarded. Still, the origin of those drafts remains the same: imperfection in copying, shuffling, doubling, and regulation. Life depends on stability, yet it also depends on this steady trickle of error. If DNA were copied with absolute perfection, if genes never shuffled, duplicated, or shifted their expression, every lineage would be locked into its current form. No new colors in butterfly wings, no novel enzymes in bacteria, no evolving resistance to new viruses. Change would halt, and with it, long-term survival. The very capacity to endure may require a small but constant dose of uncertainty. It is strange to think that your own existence is tied to this quiet chaos. Somewhere in your ancestry, a mutation may have altered how a protein folds in muscle or brain. An ancient recombination event might have brought together two gene variants that handled a nutrient more efficiently. A duplication event may have allowed a new receptor in an immune cell to recognize a wider range of threats. None of those changes knew you were coming. They simply spread because they happened not to fail, and sometimes under the right conditions they helped. So when you hear the word variation, it may be tempting to imagine noise, error, and randomness in the negative sense. But at the scale of evolution, variation is more like a reservoir of possibility, constantly refilled by the ordinary processes of copying and reshuffling DNA. It is the raw material from which lineages trace their paths through time, sometimes branching, sometimes looping back, sometimes fading away entirely. Without variation, there is no path at all, only a stillness that life has never chosen. How do some changes born from molecular accidents end up written into the history of entire species, while others vanish without a trace? How does time, patient and indifferent, turn tiny genetic quirks into sweeping patterns? we can see in fossils in forests and in our own inherited traits. To answer that, we have to watch how variation moves from one generation to the next, carried along by the simple but powerful act of inheritance. Across deep time, variation on its own would be like a storm of loose notes with no melody. What turns those scattered notes into a recognizable theme is inheritance. Differences only matter if they are carried forward again and again, from parent to offspring. That quiet continuity, the passing on of instructions written in DNA, is what allows a fleeting molecular accident to become a lasting feature of a species. Without inheritance, every generation would be a fresh roll of the dice disconnected from the last, and evolution would never build on its own history. Inside almost every cell, DNA is arranged into long strands called chromosomes. These strands are not just archives. They are working documents copied and handed down. In organisms that reproduce sexually, each parent contributes a set of chromosomes to their offspring. Those chromosomes carry genes, and each gene is a stretch of DNA that influences a particular molecule structure or process. A trait is not a single gene, but often a pattern of many working together, shaped by environment. Still, the basic principle is clear: offspring inherit versions of genes from their parents, and those versions, called alleles, can differ slightly from one another. Some alleles may alter eye color, others metabolism, others the way a cell responds to heat or cold. Early geneticists, long before DNA was seen directly, noticed that these inherited factors followed certain regularities. Traits tended to appear in predictable ratios among offspring. Those patterns suggested something particulate being passed on, rather than traits blending like paint forever. Modern molecular biology has confirmed this intuition. The key point for evolution is that alleles do not vanish simply because they are rare or subtle. As long as they do not prevent survival or reproduction entirely, they may linger quietly in a population for generations, waiting for circumstances where they matter more. A slight tweak in a receptor protein might barely affect an animal in one environment, yet become a decisive advantage in another. Inheritance is not perfect because it sits atop the variation you've already seen. Mutations occur during the copying of DNA. Recombination reshuffles genetic segments during the formation of eggs and sperm. But the overall pattern remains one of continuity. Children resemble their parents not only in appearance, but in many underlying physiological traits: how their immune systems respond, how their bones grow, how their senses perceive the world. This resemblance is not absolute. Environmental influences, random developmental noise, and epigenetic marks all add additional layers. Still, the statistical pull of heredity is strong enough that lineages maintain some recognizable identity even as they slowly change. Time is the other half of this story. Over a single generation, even a meaningful difference in survival may barely shift the frequencies of alleles in a population. One individual with a slightly better adapted trait might leave a few more descendants than average. The effect feels small, almost negligible. But let those generations repeat, not tens or hundreds of times, but thousands or millions, and those small differences begin to accumulate. A common analogy in evolutionary biology is compound interest. A modest advantage, if applied consistently, may eventually dominate. There is no need for dramatic leaps if a small edge is maintained over long stretches. Under the right conditions, that is enough to reshape worlds. Consider a population of ancestral birds faced with a changing climate. On their islands, the kinds of seeds available might shift from soft and plentiful to tough and scarce. Some birds, by chance, carry alleles that influence beak shape in a way that makes cracking harder seeds slightly easier. In any single year, these birds might have only a small edge. Perhaps they manage to feed a bit more successfully during a dry season, raise one extra chick, or survive a lean period when others starve. The difference is not absolute. Many still die, and many with less favorable beaks still manage to breed. Yet over many breeding seasons, that small probability tilts the scales. The alleles linked to the more effective beak gradually become more common generation by generation, until the average shape of the entire population has shifted. The same principle appears at microscopic scales. Bacteria exposed to a new antibiotic might initially exist in a vast, diverse population. Most cells carry alleles that leave a particular protein vulnerable to the drug, and those cells die rapidly. A few, by prior mutation, may happen to produce a slightly altered protein that the drug cannot bind as easily. At first, these resistant individuals are rare. But because they survive and divide in an environment where others perish, their alleles spread quickly. Within a relatively small number of generations, the once rare resistance allele can dominate. In this case, the evolutionary shift unfolds over days or weeks rather than millennia. But the mechanism inheritance plus time is the same. It might be tempting to imagine that evolution always acts on traits that are dramatically visible: wing shape, body size, coloration. In reality, many important alleles act behind the scenes, influencing biochemical pathways, regulatory networks, or development. A slight difference in how hormones are released can nudge growth patterns, behavior, and timing. Under stable conditions, these subtleties might blend into the background. When environments change through climate shifts, new predators, altered food sources, or human activity, those same subtleties may suddenly become decisive. Inheritance ensures that such hidden variants are not lost. They remain in the genetic deck that time keeps reshuffling. Of course, inheritance does not act alone. It works alongside chance and demography. If a population passes through a bottleneck where only a handful of individuals survive a disaster, the alleles they carry will disproportionately shape the future gene pool, regardless of whether those alleles are optimal. That is the founder effect. In a new habitat, colonized by a few pioneers, their particular mix of genes becomes the starting point for everything that follows. Over time, their descendants may diverge sharply from their cousins elsewhere, not because of a deliberate direction, but because history started from a slightly different roll of the genetic dice. In this way, time records not only selection but also accidents. One of the subtler consequences of inheritance over long spans is that lineages accumulate signatures of their past. Gene families expand, contract, and mutate, leaving behind patterns that comparative biologists can read like tree rings. Closely related species share more of these signatures. Distantly related ones show fewer. The detailed study of genomes allows reconstruction of evolutionary relationships, revealing how lineages split, migrated, and adapted over tens of millions of years. This is not speculation. It is inference drawn from shared genetic errors, duplicated segments, and conserved sequences. The same logic underlies modern phylogenetics, which tries to map the branching history of life. All of this hinges on one simple requirement: traits. That matter must at least partly be heritable. A scar gained in life does not pass to offspring. A muscle built in the gym does not instantly generate stronger children. Acquired features may shape individual experience, but they usually fade with the body. In contrast, alleles affecting how easily muscles grow, how strongly bones respond to stress, or how efficiently food is converted to energy can be inherited. Under the right conditions, those tendencies may become more common if they contribute to survival and reproduction. That boundary between what is inherited and what is merely experienced is essential to understanding how evolution uses time. From a distance, inheritance and time make evolution feel almost inevitable. Given enough generations, variation will arise. Some of it will be captured, and lineages will drift, adapt, or vanish. Yet nothing in this process guarantees progress toward any particular goal. There is no internal compass pointing toward complexity, intelligence, or beauty. The direction of change is shaped by shifting environments, random events, and the balance between costs and benefits at each moment. Some lineages become simpler, others become more specialized. A few, under rare circumstances, may evolve entirely new modes of existence. In every case, the engine underneath remains the same: genes passed on, slightly altered, revisited by selection and chance. Standing in the present, it is easy to underestimate the power of time. Human lives are short compared to the span over which inheritance exerts its full force. Even 1,000 years, many generations for us, are a blink on geological scales. But think of what those generations mean. Countless births, countless deaths, each one a point where certain alleles advance and others retreat. A small advantage repeated over and over may eventually sculpt bones, organs, and ecosystems. A small disadvantage may quietly erase entire branches of possibility. Time does not hurry. It does not need to. The question that follows naturally is, what exactly does inheritance and time reward? Which combinations of traits tend to persist and which fade away? Survival of the fittest is often quoted. But what does fittest really mean in a biological sense? Is it strength, speed, cleverness, sheer number of offspring, or something more subtle: compatibility with a specific niche at a specific moment under specific pressures? In the next chapter, the focus turns to that idea. We will look at how biologists measure fitness, not as a moral judgment or a trophy, but as a quiet accounting of which lineages manage to stay in the game long enough to pass their genes on. If there is a phrase that has been both powerful and misunderstood, it is survival of the fittest. In everyday speech, it often evokes a world ruled by violent strength or ruthless competition. But in the language of biology, fitness has nothing to do with who dominates or destroys, it has to do with who endures. To be fit, in an evolutionary sense, is not to be the strongest or the fastest, but to be the one whose genetic story continues. It is about alignment with circumstances, about being well matched to the conditions of life at a particular moment in time. Imagine a population of tiny desert plants. One grows tall and catches sunlight easily, but loses water quickly. Another remains low and compact, gathering less light, but preserving moisture. In a dry year, the small ones thrive. In a rainy one, the tall ones take over. Fitness in this landscape shifts like the wind, not as a fixed hierarchy, but as a dance between environment and form. The same applies across the living world. A polar bear is supremely fit in the Arctic, where its thick coat and layer of fat are assets. Move that same bear to the tropics, and those very adaptations become liabilities. Under the right conditions, survival depends not on the biggest claws or loudest roar, but on the quiet precision of fit. What makes fitness more subtle is that it cannot be measured in an individual's lifetime alone. It is always about descendants. A peacock with a magnificent tail may risk attracting predators. But if that tail wins him more mates, and his offspring inherit the same flair, his alleles will spread. A salmon that produces thousands of eggs, even if most perish, may still contribute more to future generations than an animal that survives for decades but leaves no young. Evolution keeps its own kind of score, written not in triumphs or losses, but in the number of genetic copies that persist. The idea of trade-offs runs through every example of survival. Energy and time are finite, so organisms must divide them among growth, maintenance, and reproduction. A species that reproduces rapidly bacteria, flies, many weeds, can adapt quickly, throwing genetic dice millions of times a day. But speed comes at the cost of stability. Each generation is expendable. Long-lived species, elephants, whales, trees, invest heavily in protection care and learning, but adapt more slowly. Each offspring is precious, guarded by layers of social or physical defense. No one strategy is best. They are simply different solutions to the same problem: how to keep a lineage alive across unpredictable environments. This trade-off extends beyond reproduction. Consider birds migrating across continents. To fly long distances, they must balance body weight, fat storage, and wing shape. Too little fat, and they starve mid-flight. Too much, and they waste energy lifting excess mass. The optimal solution is not maximal strength or speed, but a point of balance between opposing pressures. The same is true of human physiology. Our bodies are not built for record-breaking performance in any single task. We cannot outsprint a cheetah, outswim a dolphin, or outsmell a dog. But we can walk for hours, sweat to cool, and plan routes over days, an endurance pattern that suits a species built for persistence and adaptability. The measure of survival is also shaped by timing. In evolutionary terms, it is not only what traits you have, but when you deploy them. Some insects emerge and breed after a single rainstorm, matching their entire life cycle to a brief window of opportunity. Trees may wait years for the right sequence of seasons to flower and fruit. Even within species, timing can vary. Salmon populations spawn at slightly different moments, spreading risk across environmental conditions. Such staggered schedules can act like a biological hedge fund, ensuring that not all descendants are exposed to the same dangers. Over time, natural selection preserves not only specific traits, but the rhythms that keep lineages synchronized with their world. Humans, too, are bound by trade-offs and timing, even if our technology masks them. Our intelligence comes with the cost of long childhoods and heavy parental investment. Our upright posture freed our hands but strained our spines. Fitness, viewed clearly, is always local and temporary. What works brilliantly now may fail tomorrow. When climates change, when predators vanish, when food sources shift, the selective landscape tilts. In that sense, evolution is less a ladder and more a sea, with species rising and falling on the tides of circumstance. Scientists often visualize fitness using something called an adaptive landscape. Imagine a vast terrain of peaks and valleys, where each point represents a combination of traits. Height on this terrain corresponds to reproductive success. Populations tend to climb toward nearby peaks, combinations of features that work well together in a given environment. But once on a peak, a population may find it difficult to move elsewhere. To reach a higher peak, it might have to descend. First, passing through a valley of reduced fitness, where intermediate forms perform poorly. Natural selection resists such moves because it cannot plan ahead. It works with immediate outcomes, generation by generation. As a result, many lineages remain stuck on local peak solutions that are good enough, but not globally optimal. This metaphor helps explain why so many organisms carry imperfections that seem easy to fix from an engineering standpoint. Evolution cannot redesign a body from scratch. It can only modify what already exists, and each modification must function in every generation along the way. The panda's thumb is not a new digit, but a repurposed wrist bone. The human eye has a blind spot because its wiring evolved from simpler photoreceptors oriented the wrong way around. Yet within their contexts, these features work well enough to persist. The lesson is not that nature fails, but that life's success is measured by continuity, not perfection. Fitness is also dynamic in social species. Cooperative behavior: ants sharing food, wolves hunting in packs, humans building cities, can enhance survival at the group level, even if it costs individuals energy or risk. Biologists debate how to define fitness in such cases. Is it the individual's genetic contribution, or the success of kin and allies who share similar genes? Inclusive fitness theory suggests that helping relatives can spread copies of shared alleles, even if the helper sacrifices direct reproduction. Under the right conditions, generosity can be a strategy, not a flaw. Cooperation, like competition, is a route toward endurance. The most striking part of this idea is how relative it all is. Fitness has no absolute measure, no universal scale. It depends on context, the weather, the predators, the diseases, the density of the population, the availability of food, and even the behaviors of others in the same species. A trait that raises fitness in one setting may lower it in another. Thick fur helps in cold climates but kills in heat. Bright plumage may attract mates in safe habitats, but doom the same bird in forests full of hawks. Life exists in a web of shifting constraints, where fit means fitting right now. The phrase "survival of the fittest" might better be replaced by "persistence of the fitted." It captures the quiet truth that evolution is not a contest of conquest, but a search for resonance. Species that last are those that match the tempo of their environments, not forever, but long enough to pass the baton forward. Even extinction is part of that rhythm. Most lineages that have ever lived are gone, yet their genetic echoes live on in the descendants that inherited fragments of their story. So when we speak of fitness, we are really speaking of harmony between body and climate, between metabolism and food, between behavior and opportunity. Evolution does not crown champions, it preserves survivors. And survival in the grand scheme is often a matter of timing, balance, and luck. In the next chapter, that balance becomes a race. For if every species is adapting, then none can stay still for long. Predators refine their strikes, prey refine their defenses, and parasites refine their tricks. Evolution does not stop when a species becomes fit. It keeps moving the goalposts. The result is an endless contest, the Red Queen's race, where every participant must keep running just to stay in place. In Lewis Carroll's Through the Looking Glass, the Red Queen tells Alice something strange. Now here, you see, it takes all the running you can do to keep in the same place. It sounds absurd, but biology quietly obeys that rule. Every species, every cell, every gene is in motion, not just moving forward, but struggling to maintain balance as everything else changes around it. In nature, there is no permanent victory. The moment one lineage gains an advantage, others begin to adapt in response. This ceaseless back and forth is known as the Red Queen dynamic, an evolutionary arms race, where running faster only means staying even. Imagine a snake and a salamander locked in this kind of duel. In the forests of the Pacific Northwest, certain newts produce a potent toxin called tetrodotoxin, capable of paralyzing nerves by blocking sodium channels in muscle and brain cells. A single drop can kill a human. Yet some local garter snakes eat these newts without dying. How, over generations, they've evolved changes in their own sodium channels, making the toxin bind less effectively. The arms race doesn't stop there. The newts in turn produce even more toxin, forcing snakes to develop even stronger resistance. Each adaptation provokes a counter-adaptation. Neither species wins. They simply keep pace, climbing an invisible spiral, where success on one side resets the stakes for the other. This Red Queen pattern echoes across every level of life. Pathogens evolve new strategies to invade, while hosts evolve immune defenses to block them. bacteria exposed to antibiotics develop resistance. In response, humans design new drugs which then select for new resistant strains. Plants produce bitter or toxic compounds to discourage herbivores. Insects evolve enzymes that neutralize those chemicals, sometimes even repurposing them for their own defense. It's an evolutionary treadmill, powered by conflict, but also by connection, because each side defines the other's challenges. If this sounds exhausting, that's because it is. Evolutionary biologists describe it as a kind of biological inflation. The currency of survival is constantly devalued by the adaptations of others. A predator that hunts better forces prey to run faster or hide better, which in turn forces the predator to refine its own tactics. Fitness, as seen in the previous chapter, is not absolute. It is relative to the landscape of all other living things. When that landscape keeps moving, stability demands change. Consider parasites, the ultimate Red Queen runners. A single parasite can reproduce millions of times inside its host, generating an army of slightly different genetic variants. Some evade immune cells better. Others resist chemical defenses. Others colonize new tissues. The host, meanwhile, deploys its own genetic arsenal, antibodies and recognition proteins that adapt to detect invaders more effectively. The two sides race across generations, the parasite through sheer speed of mutation, the host through recombination and selective memory in immune genes. In some species, sexual reproduction itself may have evolved as a defense against parasites because it constantly reshuffles genetic combinations, producing offspring with novel immune profiles. By mixing alleles, populations make themselves harder targets. The Red Queen also explains why extinction rates remain roughly steady over time. Even if environments seem stable, the web of interactions within ecosystems never is. Predators, prey, competitors, and symbionts continuously modify one another's niches. A species that stops adapting, even one perfectly suited to its old conditions, will eventually fall behind. The advantage of one era becomes the vulnerability of the next. The fossil record, with its sudden disappearances and gradual replacements, can be read as a long record of such shifts. What's striking is that these arms races often generate beauty as well as brutality. The intricate patterns on butterfly wings, the choreography of predator-prey, maneuvers, the elegant symmetry of horns and antlers, all are outcomes of pressures and counter-pressures over time. A gazelle's leap, for instance, might seem wasteful, but high, unpredictable bounds signal to predators that it is strong and alert, not worth chasing. The cheetah, in turn, refines its acceleration and tactics to counter this evasiveness. Each species sculpts the other's body and behavior in an evolutionary duet. Under the right conditions, even conflict becomes co-creation. Not all arms races are violent. In plants and pollinators, for example, cooperation hides its own kind of tension. A flower might evolve a deeper nectar tube to favor a specific pollinator, excluding less efficient visitors. The pollinator then evolves a longer tongue or proboscis to reach that nectar more easily. The result is exquisite, matching orchids and moths, hummingbirds and trumpet-shaped flowers, but beneath it lies the same Red Queen logic. Each change in one partner exerts pressure on the other to keep up. The beauty of these relationships belies the restless negotiation that sustains them. Even within a single species, the Red Queen can stir conflict. Males and females may evolve opposing reproductive strategies, one side investing in quantity, the other in quality. One side developing ornaments to attract, the other resistance to manipulation. This sexual arms race can drive rapid change in traits like plumage, song, or mating behavior, setting the stage for the next chapter's exploration of beauty and attraction. But even here, the principle is the same. Evolution's balance point shifts, because every advantage alters the game. What makes the Red Queen truly humbling is how universal it is. It operates in the bloodstream, in forests, in coral reefs, in corporate markets, even in human technology. Every innovation, biological or cultural, becomes a new baseline. Predators evolve sharper teeth, humans invent armor. Bacteria mutate. We create stronger antibiotics. Algorithms improve. So do the systems that exploit them. Progress under the Red Queen's law never stands still. It only resets the race. Some researchers suggest that the Red Queen is not just a side effect of evolution, but one of its engines. Constant competition maintains diversity by preventing any single form from monopolizing an ecosystem. As one species adapts, others radiate into the gaps it leaves, keeping the web of life dynamic. In this sense, perpetual struggle is not failure, but fuel. The world remains alive precisely because it never reaches equilibrium. Still, the cost is steep. The Red Queen demands endless energy and risk. For every lineage that successfully runs countless, others fall behind and vanish. Extinction is not an exception to her rule. It is the toll she collects for participation. The persistence of life, then, is not a story of triumph, but of endurance, a steady commitment to movement, to running simply because stopping is not an option. And yet, amid all this, motion patterns emerge. Nature does not collapse into chaos. Instead, it produces recurring forms and familiar solutions. The wings of bats and birds, the fins of sharks and dolphins, the eyes of octopus and humans, each born from separate histories, yet converging on similar designs. How can that be? If the race is endless and the possibilities infinite, why do different lineages so often rhyme with one another? In the next chapter, we'll explore these recurring patterns and illusions, the way evolution, for all its chaos, keeps rediscovering the same shapes of success. Step back far enough, and nature starts to look like a gallery of recurring designs. A shark and a dolphin slice through the sea with matching silhouettes. A cactus in the American desert and a euphorbia in Africa wear the same armor of spines. A hawk's eye and an octopus's eye focus light in nearly identical ways, though their ancestors diverged hundreds of millions of years ago. The closer you look, the stranger it becomes. Evolution, a process driven by chance mutations and shifting pressures, somehow keeps arriving at the same answers. These echoes are not accidents of appearance. They are convergences, patterns, shaped by the deep physics and logic of survival. When you think about it, the possibilities for living forms should be endless. Genes can shuffle in countless ways. Mutations create endless variations. But the physical world imposes its own boundaries. Gravity, light, fluid dynamics, thermodynamics, all draw invisible lines around what can exist. If a creature moves through water, drag matters. If it flies, lift and weight must balance. If it absorbs sunlight, surface area and energy efficiency define its shape. Within those constraints, evolution's vast experimentation keeps rediscovering similar solutions because the same problems keep reappearing. The result is a universe of life that feels both diverse and strangely self-similar. Consider the ocean, where drag is the great sculptor. Water resists motion far more than air, so speed demands sleekness. Over hundreds of millions of years, fish, reptiles, and mammals have each independently evolved the same torpedo-like outline: a tapered head, a powerful tail and fins positioned for stability. The ancient ichthyosaurs, reptiles that vanished long before whales ever existed, look uncannily like dolphins. Both, under different suns, discovered the same geometry of efficiency. The message is quiet but clear: under the right conditions, natural selection rhymes. On land, the rhyme continues in other forms. In the desert, plants have no choice but to become engineers of water. Thick stems, waxy skins, hidden pores and spines in place of leaves all evolve again and again in separate lineages. To an untrained eye, the cactus of the Sonoran Desert and the euphorbia of Namibia might seem cousins, but their kinships are worlds apart. Evolution did not copy itself. It simply solved the same problem twice. When water is rare and sunlight fierce, the viable options narrow until parallel shapes appear almost inevitable. The same logic applies to senses. The eye, that symbol of perception and awareness, has evolved not once but dozens of times. Simple light sensors arose in worms, scallops, insects, and vertebrates, each refined through different mechanisms. The camera-type I1 lens, focusing light onto a receptive surface, appeared separately in humans and octopuses. The details differ. Our eyes wire the nerves in front of the retina, producing a blind spot. The octopus wires them behind, creating a seamless image. But both systems rely on the same underlying physics: curved surfaces, bending light membranes, detecting photons. Under the right conditions, complexity itself seems to have certain preferred paths. This repetition can be deceptive. When two species look similar, we instinctively assume a shared ancestry. But convergence and mimicry can trick the eye. Some moths resemble wasps, some harmless snakes mirror venomous ones, and even flowers can imitate the colors and scents of female insects to attract males. In these cases, the resemblance is not coincidence, but strategy, an evolutionary illusion crafted through the same slow feedback loops of selection. The deceived party, whether predator or pollinator, writes the script through its own perception. What one creature sees as beauty or danger becomes another creature's disguise. The world, then, is full of visual lies that work because they exploit shared biases. A pattern that startles a predator once may be copied by other species until the warning itself gains meaning. Poisonous butterflies wear bold colors to announce their toxicity. Harmless ones mimic those same colors to borrow the protection. This interplay of truth and imitation blurs the line between art and survival. In nature's gallery, deception is a medium as powerful as strength. But these illusions also remind us that natural selection is an artist constrained by physics and history. It cannot conjure any shape it likes. It can only modify what already exists. When an old structure finds new purpose, a feather shifting from insulation to flight, a jawbone turning into an ear bone, it reveals the improvisational side of evolution. The result is not perfection, but adaptation, layered upon adaptation. And yet out of these constraints, beauty emerges. The symmetry of shells, the tessellation of a tortoise's carapace, the spiral of a fern, all are mathematical by necessity, yet poetic in effect. Patterns also exist beyond form in behavior. The migration of birds, the schooling of fish, even the traffic of cells in your bloodstream, all follow algorithms that minimize conflict and energy cost. When resources pulse seasonally, timing becomes a pattern. Flowers bloom as pollinators emerge. Prey give birth as grass grows. Predators raise young when prey are abundant. Each rhythm synchronizes with another, producing the great choreography of ecosystems. None of this is planned, but it functions as if it were. Under the right conditions, order emerges naturally from countless local interactions. Even human culture, when viewed from a wide enough angle, seems to follow these same lines. Our cities grow like coral reefs, branching and overlapping. Our innovations mirror biological arms races. Our art recycles motifs of symmetry, flow, and proportion that echo natural laws. The difference is awareness we can notice the rhyme, though we did not write it. Perhaps this recognition is why patterns in nature evoke such deep calm. They resonate with something we already know in our bones. The illusion of design, then, is not a mistake, but a reflection of deeper regularities. The universe is not random in every direction. It has gradients of possibility, corridors of feasibility, carved by physics and chemistry. Evolution explores those corridors, again and again, guided by the invisible hands of constraint. What we see as repetition is life discovering what works and rediscovering it endlessly. But these patterns, for all their beauty, come with a cost. Every advantage, every refinement has a price. The peacock's feathers that dazzle potential mates also weigh him down. The bright scales that warn predators of poison make escape harder if the warning fails. Nature's illusions are never free. They trade safety for display, strength for grace, invisibility for attention. And that trade leads us into one of evolution's most paradoxical arenas, the evolution of beauty itself. Why would nature pour so much effort into creating things that seem useless or even dangerous? Brilliant colors, elaborate songs, intricate dances, just to attract another member of the same species. What purpose could extravagance serve in a world that prizes efficiency? In the next chapter, we'll explore that mystery. How love, display, and the price of beauty shape the story of survival, just as powerfully as tooth and claw. If natural selection is the story of survival, then sexual selection is the story of attraction, and it is every bit as ruthless. It asks a question that biology alone cannot fully answer. Why should life, in its endless struggle to persist, spend so much energy on beauty? A peacock's tail is heavy, conspicuous, and expensive to grow. The song of a nightingale costs calories and draws predators. The antlers of a stag consume calcium and risk breaking in combat, and yet nature keeps doing it, building ornaments, colors, and performances that seem to defy the logic of survival. Somewhere in the arithmetic of evolution, beauty itself has a place. Charles Darwin called this principle sexual selection, a process distinct from survival advantage. While natural selection favors traits that help an organism live long enough to reproduce, sexual selection favors traits that increase the chance of reproduction itself, even at a cost to survival. It is the difference between living and being chosen. A drab, cautious bird might live longer than a flamboyant one. But if the showy individual wins more mates and leaves more offspring, its genes will still spread. In this way, evolution sometimes rewards extravagance over prudence, display over discretion. Look closely at the male peacock. Each feather on his train is a marvel of physics. Microscopic structures scatter and interfere with light, producing blues and greens, far brighter than any pigment could. When he fans his tail, the feathers shimmer and quiver, catching sunlight and sound simultaneously. The effect is hypnotic. The female peahen, less adorned but no less important, watches with quiet discernment. Her choice decides which patterns of color, symmetry, and stamina will echo into the next generation. Sexual selection is at its core a dialogue between display and perception. A conversation carried out in gestures, songs, and light. Across species, this dialogue takes countless forms. In birds of paradise, males transform forest clearings into stages, dancing and twisting with impossible precision. In frogs, loudness itself becomes a currency. Those that can call longest or deepest advertise robust lungs and muscles. In crickets, it's rhythm. In beetles, it's scent. Each sensory world has its own language of attraction. The same rule holds. Under the right conditions, beauty becomes a signal of underlying quality. an honest indicator of fitness. To produce an extravagant signal consistently, an organism must be healthy, well-fed, free of parasites, and well-tuned to its environment. Beauty, then, is not separate from survival. It is its advertisement, yet the system is never entirely honest. Evolution breeds deceivers as quickly as suitors. Some male fish mimic females to slip past dominant rivals and fertilize eggs unnoticed. Certain orchids emit chemicals that imitate the pheromones of female insects, luring males into fruitless courtship that spreads pollen instead of love. Even humans, though far removed from these examples, remain masters of display, layering art, adornment, and behavior onto the primal script of attraction. The interplay between authenticity and illusion runs through every level of the living world. Darwin once wrote that the sight of a male bird covered in iridescent plumes makes me sick because he couldn't fit it into the clean machinery of natural selection. But later, he realized the machinery could make room for desire. Beauty, even when costly, could persist if it served as a reliable signal of genetic health. Over time, preferences themselves evolve if females consistently choose brighter males' genes for both brightness, and that preference become linked, amplifying one another in a feedback loop. This is known as Fisherian runaway, a phrase that captures the accelerating spiral of attraction. The more exaggerated a trait becomes, the more attention it wins, and the more it spreads, until the cost of survival reins it back. The results can be stunning, but also fragile. A species balanced on the edge of extravagance lives under permanent tension. Too little display, and mating success collapses. Too much, and predators or exhaustion take their toll. The male Irish elk, long extinct, carried antlers wider than its entire body length, majestic symbols that may also have hastened its demise. The tightrope between beauty and burden is a recurring theme in evolution, a reminder that even nature's masterpieces are products of compromise. Sexual selection doesn't just shape bodies, it sculpts behaviors, intelligence, and even social systems. In many species, elaborate courtship rituals act as tests of memory and coordination. Birds learn complex songs that require neural sophistication, and females may use song quality to gauge a potential mate's brain and development. Among humans, the same impulse manifests in creativity, storytelling, music, art, the symbolic displays that attract attention not through direct utility, but through the signal they send. I have energy to spare. I can afford to create beauty. Seen through this lens, much of culture may be a continuation of peacock feathers by other means. Still, beauty's power is not confined to reproduction. Once it exists, it can ripple outward, influencing ecosystems. Brightly colored flowers attract pollinators that carry pollen between plants. Fruit with appealing colors and flavors coax animals to disperse seeds. In both cases, visual and sensory pleasure become evolutionary tools, linking attraction to ecological function. Under the right conditions, aesthetics becomes survival strategy. There's a quiet paradox in this. Evolution is often portrayed as blind, utilitarian, even cold. But the world it produces overflows with color, song, and form that seem designed to evoke awe. Perhaps that awe itself is part of the system, an echo of ancient instincts that once guided choices of mate, fruit, or landscape. What began as biology becomes emotion. What began as display becomes art. The peacock and the sunset speak the same language, though in different dialects of light. And yet, behind every show of beauty lies a cost, sometimes tragic. A tropical bird's plume that dazzles potential mates also draws hunters and collectors. A fish's vivid scales make it the target of predators and aquariums alike. Even in humans, the pursuit of aesthetic ideals can lead to exhaustion, competition, and loss. The price of beauty, it seems, is the same as its promise: attention. In evolution, as in art, to be seen is both gift and risk. So perhaps the question isn't why life creates beauty, but why it cannot stop. Attraction fuels diversity, keeps genes moving, and links every observer to what is observed. It reminds us that survival is not enough, that existence at its most complete reaches beyond endurance into expression. Under the right conditions, to live is also to display. And when display becomes too costly, when signals split populations into those who can afford extravagance and those who cannot, a new tension forms a threshold where attraction begins to create isolation, and isolation begins to create new species. The next chapter steps into that threshold, the places where love, geography, and chance divide the living world into separate branches, the birthplaces of new beginnings. Every species that exists today is both a survivor and a fragment, one branch among millions, on a tree that is constantly splitting. The idea of a species feels simple: a group of organisms that can reproduce with one another and produce fertile offspring. But in the long arc of time, that boundary is porous. It shifts, fractures, and reforms like cracks in cooling glass. Somewhere in the quiet spaces between one generation and the next, a single population becomes two. The question is not whether this happens, it always has, but how. Speciation, the birth of new species, begins with separation. Sometimes the divide is physical. A mountain range rises, a river changes course, or a stretch of ocean widens. A once continuous population finds itself cut in two, and from that moment, the two halves begin to drift apart. This is allopatric speciation, literally different place. Over generations, mutations, selection, and genetic drift reshape each population in slightly different ways. When the barrier finally erodes and individuals meet again, they may no longer recognize each other as potential mates. The invisible border has become biological. Islands are the purest laboratories for this process. On the Galapagos, finches that share a common ancestor now display a dozen forms of beak, each tuned to a different food source. On the Hawaiian archipelago, fruit flies evolve into hundreds of species, each confined to its own valley or volcano slope. Geography isolates, and isolation accelerates change. When movement stops, time begins its work. Under the right conditions, 1,000 small differences add up to a permanent divide. But not all borders are drawn by geography. Sometimes they are drawn by behavior, timing, or taste. In a single forest, populations of frogs may breed in different ponds or call at different times of night. Insects may feed on separate host plants. Birds may prefer slightly different songs. This is sympatric speciation, same place, where divergence grows in the midst of proximity. It relies on subtler mechanisms, preferences that limit gene flow until the two groups are more interested in their own kind than in their neighbors. Even a small bias repeated over generations can widen into a canyon. The process is gradual, but not invisible. Biologists can watch it unfold in real time. In the lakes of East Africa, cichlid fish display extraordinary diversity. Hundreds of species each, with unique colors, jaws, and behaviors, all descended from a single ancestral population. Some specialize in eating algae from rocks, others hunt smaller fish. Still, others sift plankton from the water. Their colors are not mere decoration. They serve as mating cues, signals that maintain separation, even where ranges overlap. Yet when turbidity increases from human activity, clouding the water, those colors blur. Species that once remained distinct begin to hybridize, merging into new forms. Borders are fragile things. Hybrid zones, regions where related species meet and interbreed, illustrate that fragility beautifully. Along those edges, the genetic boundaries between species blur and shimmer. Some hybrids are weak or sterile, like the mule between horse and donkey. Others thrive carrying combinations of traits that neither parent species possessed. In some cases, hybrids form stable, self-sustaining populations, a third branch born of two. The line between divergence and unity is thin, shifting with every environmental fluctuation. It's tempting to imagine that speciation follows a clean sequence: divide, adapt, stabilize, done. But evolution is rarely tidy. Populations may diverge, reconnect, exchange genes again, then part once more. Species are not immutable boxes. They are dynamic clouds of variation, coalescing and dispersing through time. Even humans, who like to draw clear distinctions, belong to a lineage shaped by hybridization. Our genomes carry traces of Neanderthals and Denisovans, remnants of ancient crossings that broadened what it means to be us. The birth of species, then, is not a singular event. It's a prolonged negotiation. What makes two groups different enough depends on context. How much gene flow persists, how strongly selection favors separation, how long barriers last. Sometimes speciation can begin with a single mutation that disrupts mating compatibility. Other times, it takes vast geological spans of drift and isolation. The tempo varies, but the rhythm is constant. Diversity arises from division. Behind this pattern lies a deep paradox. The same forces that connect life, inheritance, reproduction, adaptation, also drive it apart. Without separation, evolution would converge, endlessly blending differences into sameness. But without connection, life would fragment beyond recognition, each lineage vanishing into solipsism. Speciation walks the narrow path between those extremes, maintaining diversity without losing coherence. It is the engine of variety, the reason coral reefs shimmer with thousands of species rather than one perfect design. Geology and climate act as silent accomplices. When continents drift, when glaciers advance and retreat, when sea levels rise and fall, ecosystems rearrange their inhabitants like cards in a shuffled deck. Forests break apart into refuges, then reconnect. Rivers reverse their flow. Coastlines crumble and reform. Each rearrangement isolates some populations and mingles others, resetting the stage for evolution's experiments. The biodiversity of today's world is the accumulated outcome of billions of such experiments, each one a story of distance, patience, and transformation. Even extinction plays a role in shaping the tree of life. When a species disappears, it leaves ecological vacancies, open niches that surviving lineages can fill. The extinction of the dinosaurs catastrophic, as it was cleared space for mammals to diversify. The death of one branch can nourish the growth of many others. In this way, endings become beginnings, and the tree renews itself endlessly. Perhaps that is why every field biologist feels a certain reverence when naming a new species. To describe it is to catch one moment in the flow, to give temporary shape to something that will keep changing long after we are gone. The boundaries we draw are human conveniences. Nature itself knows only continua, and yet understanding those borders helps us glimpse the larger pattern, the way life constantly tests its own definitions. A river carves new paths as it moves. Life does the same, splitting and merging, shaping itself to the terrain of time. Each new species is both an answer and another question, proof that evolution never stops asking what else might work. But if every lineage carries the traces of its history, then each also carries the weight of its past. Evolution cannot start fresh each time it branches. It must build from the material already available. Some of that inheritance is ingenious, but some is awkward, inefficient, even absurd. In the next chapter, we'll turn to those imperfections, the scars of history, etched into living design, and ask why evolution, despite its wonders, so often leaves the world full of flaws. If you were to leaf through the blueprints of life, you would not find the clean drafts of an engineer. You would see layers of revisions, crossed out lines, quick fixes patched on top of older solutions. Each one functional enough to keep the story going, but rarely elegant. Evolution's genius lies not in perfection, but in persistence. It builds with whatever materials are already lying around, constrained by what came before. Every species, every organ, every gene is the product of deep inheritance. And with inheritance comes baggage. Consider the human body. We like to think of it as finely tuned, but in truth, it is a compromise, an improvisation built on an ancient quadrupedal frame. Our spine, once designed for walking on all fours, now bears the vertical weight of our entire torso. It curves in subtle shapes to maintain balance, but those same curves create stress points, slipped discs, back pain, hernias. These are not signs of design failure, but of evolution's inability to start over. It cannot unmake the spine and begin anew. It can only bend it into adequacy. The recurrent laryngeal nerve of the giraffe tells the same story in more dramatic form. In fish-like ancestors, this nerve took a short route from brain to gills. As necks elongated over evolutionary time, the nerve remained looped around a major artery in the chest. Today, in a giraffe, that means the nerve travels several meters down the neck and back up again to reach the larynx, a needless detour that wastes tissue and energy. But because the loop still works, natural selection has little reason to fix it. It is a masterpiece of inefficiency that survives because it functions well enough. Look into the human eye, and you'll find another relic of history. The retina, where light is converted into electrical signals, is wired backward. The photoreceptors face away from incoming light, and the nerve fibers run in front of them. The optic nerve exits through the middle of the retina, creating a literal blind spot. Octopuses, whose eyes evolved independently, have no such flaw. Their photoreceptors face forward, their wiring runs cleanly behind. Why not us? Because vertebrate eyes were built from an ancestral nerve layer that folded the wrong way, and reversing it would have required re-engineering, embryonic development from scratch. Evolution cannot scrap a prototype. It can only modify what is already alive. Such quirks are not rare. The panda's thumb is not a thumb at all, but an enlarged wrist bone repurposed to grip bamboo. The path of the human vas deferens loops absurdly over the ureter because our organs shifted position as we stood upright. Whales breathe air through nostrils that migrated to the top of their heads, yet still retain the remnants of their land mammal lungs. The vertebrate heart twists awkwardly during development, a remnant of its fish ancestry, and our sinuses drain upward, ensuring a lifetime of colds. Every one of these imperfections is a fossil of function, a trace of the past embedded in the present. It may seem easy to judge these errors, but evolution is not an artist striving for symmetry. It is a tinkerer working with spare parts. Its only measure of success is survival and reproduction. If a trait functions adequately, no matter how clumsy its architecture, it persists. Perfection, in that sense, is irrelevant. What matters is feasibility under current conditions. The blind spot in the eye doesn't doom us. The giraffe's nerve still fires. The human spine supports just enough years of labor to raise children. Nature's standard is not eternal excellence. It is good enough for now. Why then do we see so much complexity so many convoluted pathways and overlapping redundancies, because each new layer of adaptation must fit onto an existing structure. Genes duplicate, diverge, and overlap. Pathways that once controlled digestion become co-opted for hormone signaling. Molecules that once fought bacteria evolve into regulators of the immune system. Every innovation carries echoes of older roles. It's not designed by replacement, but by accretion, like a coral reef, built from the skeletons of those who came before. This inheritance shapes not only anatomy, but behavior. Our brains, for instance, carry ancient layers within them, a primitive structure for reflexes and survival, a limbic system for emotion and motivation, and a neocortex for reasoning and abstraction. These layers don't always cooperate. Rational thought and instinct coexist uneasily because they were never meant to be integrated perfectly. They simply accumulated. The flaws of human psychology, our biases, our overreactions, our contradictions, are not malfunctions, but side effects of that layering. We are built from revisions, not redesigns. In evolutionary genetics, this constraint is sometimes called path dependence. Once a lineage moves down a certain path, future possibilities narrow. A bird cannot easily give up its wings, even if flight becomes costly, because its entire skeleton is shaped around them. A snake cannot regrow limbs without rewriting its developmental blueprints. Evolution can explore nearby variations, but rarely leap to entirely new architectures. Under the right conditions, small steps can accumulate into astonishing complexity, but the footprints of history are always visible beneath the surface. This realism makes evolution more human, not less. It mirrors our own creative process. We edit, repurpose, adapt. We take an old house and renovate it, leaving pipes that don't quite fit. We update old code, knowing some legacy bugs will remain. We inherit traditions, tools, and habits that constrain us even as they define us. Nature works the same way, only on a vaster timescale and without a conscious hand. Its imperfections are the price of continuity. And yet, there is beauty in this imperfection. The cracks in nature's machinery reveal its story. The blind spot in the human eye is a window into ancestry. The awkward detour of the giraffe's nerve traces the lineage of vertebrates through deep time. When biologists dissect a body or sequence a genome, they are not uncovering flawless design, but the history of survival etched in molecular scars. Each inefficiency is evidence that life does not need to be perfect. It only needs to endure. Perhaps that is the quiet lesson of the tree of life. Perfection is the enemy of persistence. A world of flawless organisms would be brittle, unable to bend when the winds of change arrive. Imperfection, by contrast, allows flexibility. A slightly flawed enzyme can evolve a new function. A redundant pathway can become a safety net. A messy genome can harbor the seeds of future innovation. The very looseness of biology, the room for error, is what makes long-term survival possible. So, when you feel the ache in your back or the limitations of your own body, remember that you are not the end product of an engineer's blueprint, but the living continuation of billions of years of adjustment. The weight of history bends your bones and flows through your veins. You carry within you the compromises of fish, reptiles, and mammals, a walking archive of imperfect success. But evolution does not stop here. For the first time in history, one species, ours, has begun to see the mechanism clearly enough to alter it. We no longer wait for slow mutation and chance. We edit genes, build machines that learn and reshape ecosystems. The next chapter steps into this new frontier where the line between evolution and intention begins to blur, and life itself becomes a conscious participant in its own unfolding story. For billions of years, evolution has been a blind sculptor. It worked slowly, without foresight, shaping life through trial and error. Each success measured only by the persistence of its descendants. But now, for the first time, one of its creations has opened its eyes and turned the tools of evolution back upon itself. Humanity, with its science and technology, has stepped into the role of both experiment and experimenter. The story of change no longer unfolds only in forests and oceans. It hums in laboratories, glows on computer screens, and pulses through the circuits of machines that can think. Evolution, once purely biological, has become self-aware. It began innocently enough with seeds and livestock. Thousands of years ago, humans began to domesticate plants and animals, guiding selection intentionally. Wheat that yielded more grain dogs, that herded better horses, that ran faster. These choices were evolution accelerated by purpose. Artificial selection replaced random chance with human preference, compressing what might take millennia into centuries. But the principle was still the same: variation, inheritance, selection, and time. We just shortened the intervals and redefined the goals. Today, the tools have changed beyond recognition. Gene editing technologies such as CRISPR allow scientists to rewrite DNA, directly correcting mutations, inserting new sequences, or silencing genes altogether. We are no longer limited to breeding what exists. We can design what does not yet exist. Mosquitoes engineered to resist malaria, crops built to endure drought, bacteria programmed to produce medicine. These are not metaphors but daily experiments. Under the right conditions, evolution itself becomes programmable. The implications are immense. For the first time, species may not be bound by their inherited limits. We could, in theory, modify humans to resist disease, extend life, or adapt to extreme climates. We could engineer microbes that digest plastic or generate clean fuels. But with such power comes a new kind of uncertainty. Every modification ripples outward through ecosystems, cultures, and generations. The old rule of good enough for now gives way to something more fragile: we think we understand enough. The cautionary note is clear: evolution never stops at the point we intend. Beyond the biological, another kind of evolution is emerging: digital. Algorithms, neural networks, and self-learning systems evolve faster than any cell. They replicate, mutate, and optimize through virtual generations measured in milliseconds. Artificial intelligence is, in a sense, evolution freed from biology, variation and selection happening in circuits instead of cells. Machines learn to recognize faces, drive cars, write poetry, and design new molecules. They evolve toward goals we set, but their paths are increasingly opaque. As with life itself, complexity arises not from planning, but from iteration. The question is no longer whether machines will evolve, but whether we will recognize ourselves in their reflection when they do. Meanwhile, climate change is forcing natural selection back into high gear. As oceans warm and forests burn, species are shifting their ranges, altering behaviors, or dying out. Urban environments, our cities, highways, and light-polluted skies are becoming new arenas of adaptation. Pigeons change feather color to resist pollutants. Plants bloom earlier to match artificial seasons. Insects navigate by neon instead of moonlight. We have become both the environment and the evolutionary pressure. Life is responding to us, and in doing so, remaking us. Some scientists speak of a new epoch, the Anthropocene, the age in which humans have become a geological force. But perhaps it is better seen as a feedback loop, a new layer of selection acting on consciousness itself. Our inventions alter the planet. the planet's changes alter us, and our responses feed back again. Culture, technology, and biology intertwine, evolving as a single system. The boundary between nature and human design grows thinner with every passing decade. This blurring raises a profound question. If we can direct evolution, should we? In nature, the Red Queen kept balance through constant motion. No species could dominate for long without becoming prey or collapsing under its own success. Human-guided evolution risks breaking that balance. When we decide which genes to keep, which species to save, which machines to build, we inherit not just power but responsibility. A single edit in a crop can alter an ecosystem. A line of code can shift economies and lives. We are no longer running the race. We are building the track as we go. Yet within that uncertainty lies hope. The same understanding that allows us to harm can allow us to heal. We can restore lost species, protect genetic diversity, and design technologies that harmonize, rather than compete with natural systems. Evolution has always been a story of adaptation. Now, adaptation includes awareness. For the first time, the capacity to evolve may depend not only on mutation and selection, but on wisdom, the ability to anticipate consequences, to choose restraint as a survival strategy. If there is a theme that runs through the history of life, it is continuity through change. Stars forged elements, planets cooled molecules, formed cells, and cells formed beings capable of reflection. Each phase inherited both the possibilities and the limitations of the one before. Humanity is another such inheritance, a fragile bridge between what evolution once was and what it might become. We are the first species to hold its own future in its hands, and the last that can afford to misunderstand it, perhaps under the right conditions. The next great leap will not be physical, but moral learning to evolve without consuming everything in the process. To act not as masters of evolution, but as its conscious expression. The peacock's feather, the neural network, the child, yet unborn, all are chapters in the same long narrative of adaptation. The future of that story depends on whether we can see them as connected as parts of one unfolding organism called life. And so as the night quiets and your thoughts drift, remember this: evolution is not a finished tale, nor a distant memory of fossils and ancestors. It is happening in you, in the microbes in your gut, in the ideas you share, in the technologies you build. The story continues, written in genes and algorithms alike, its ink the movement of time itself. If there is a design, it is this life learning to understand itself. And tonight, in the stillness between breaths, you are part of that understanding. And maybe now, somewhere between one breath and the next, you've already drifted halfway to sleep. The hum of the world outside has softened, the mind's edges are loosening, and the vast machinery of thought is slowing into the rhythm of rest. If you're still awake, you've just spent the last while wandering through billions of years, through oceans that learn to breathe, through genes that learn to remember, through creatures that learn to feel, and finally through us who learned to wonder. It's strange, isn't it, to think that everything we are, every heartbeat, every dream is just one more way the universe is exploring itself. Tonight, as you sink into quiet, remember that nothing in nature ever truly stops. Even as you sleep, your cells are dividing, your brain is sorting memories, your heart keeps time with the slow pulse of the earth turning beneath you. You are part of that rhythm, the gentle continuation of everything that has ever lived. Evolution doesn't end in the past. It whispers through every breath you take. So, if your eyes are closing now, let them. Let the day dissolve and the thoughts unwind. You've done enough running for one lifetime of a day. The story of life will keep unfolding without hurry, as it always has, patiently, beautifully, imperfectly. Tomorrow, you'll wake up slightly different than before. Cells, renewed ideas, rearrange, the quiet work of change continuing invisibly. That's all evolution ever wanted, to keep moving forward softly through time. Good night, dear listener. May your dreams drift through galaxies and forests alike. May you rest easy, knowing that even in sleep you belong to something vast, ancient, and still becoming. The night is yours. The story continues.